Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on wherever you are joining from. I, Purushendra Singh, on behalf of CUTS International, welcome everyone to today's session titled Navigating Non-Traditional Security Challenges in the Indo-Pacific Region, Need for a United Approach. Before we dive into the informative and fruitful discussion, just setting out some house announcements. Today's session will be 1 hour long. The panel discussion will be for 45 minutes, and after which we'll have a quick Q&A session to make it more interactive. We encourage the members of the panel to keep their cameras on during the session. Also, please keep your microphones on mute unless you are speaking. We encourage the members of the panel to cameras on. Thank you, Kristy. Now we can see you. Welcome. All right. Yeah. Just to let you know that this session is being recorded and will be released later on our CUTS YouTube channel. It is encouraged that the audience members post their questions, indicating relevant speakers in the chat box to make this session more interactive. Some of the questions from the audience sides, we already have it. So thank you and let them coming. Let them keep them coming. As the chair and moderator of this webinar, I would like to draw your attention to the forum under which this issue-specific webinar is taking place. The Indo-Pacific Civil Society Forum is a coalition of CSOs, NGOs, think tank academias, which work with government organizations towards realizing a shared vision of peace, security, stability, and prosperity in the Indo-Pacific region. Moreover, this forum is a strong link between the citizens at the grassroots level, opinion makers and policymakers at national levels, international levels, spread all across the vast geography of the Indo-Pacific region. This will help bridging macro-micro information and policy gaps. Having said that, I would now like to lay the foundation of today's session. The term Indo-Pacific geographically covers all countries and islands surrounding either the Indian Ocean or the Pacific Ocean, encompassing mainland of Africa and Asian nations, which border these oceans. But this is not correct in totality, as the regions in Europe and other landlocked countries on the west coast of Africa, and such as Nepal, are also part of the larger Indo-Pacific construct, which is often regarded as the maritime underbelly of the globe. I say this as vitality of this region has been inducing almost all the countries of the world to harness the untapped potential of the region. The Indo-Pacific region accounts for 60% of the world's population, more than 65% of the world's GDP, 67% of the world's indigenous people, 37% of the world's poverty or poor, 40% of international migrants. Now, all that gives rise to a number of challenges, and here we are to dive in to find solutions. And there's a need for a collective solution to all of this. Having said that, and understanding that no single country alone will be able to find solution to the existing and emerging non-traditional security challenges in this region, which we call hope of future. With this, I would now like to introduce our distinguished speakers. Starting with Pramod Jaiswal. He is Research Director, Nepal Institute for International Cooperation from Nepal. Kristy Su, Director, Taiwan ASEAN Studies Center. Third, Dr. Swasti Rao, Associate Fellow, Europea and Eurasia Center, Manohar Parrikar Institute of Defense Studies and Analysis. And lastly, Aman Thakker, Adjunct Fellow at the Center for Strategic and International Studies in the US. So thank you once again for joining us for this session. Now, as I've mentioned, surpassing the geographical constraint, let me dive with our first panel to share his views and remarks on how does the role of CSOs or the NGOs in addressing the root causes of piracy and terrorism, which are prevalent across other landlocked countries, including Nepal. Over to you, Dr. Jaiswal.
Thank you, Mr. Singh. At the outset, let me thank the organizer, CUTS International, for inviting me to the Indo-Pacific Civil Society Forum, which is held on a very important topic of today, navigating non-traditional security challenges in the Indo-Pacific, need for a united approach. Before I start, let me briefly introduce NIICE, Nepal Institute for International Cooperation Engagement, It is an independent, apolitical, and non-partisan think tank which believes in freedom, democracy, and world free from conflict. Indo-Pacific Affairs is one of our major research focus. We have 4 research centers, and Center for Indo-Pacific Affairs is one of the major ones. Currently, NIICE is working on Nepal's outlook to Indo-Pacific, where we are trying to explore what should be the major focus of Nepal when it comes to Indo-Pacific and how it can collaborate around the world in the current complex geopolitical situation. Coming back to the topic today, today I'm asked to highlight the role of non-governmental organizations in addressing the root cause of piracy and terrorism, their mitigation and readdressal process. We all are aware that a vast and dynamic geopolitical space of Indo-Pacific, which encompasses much of the world's most populous and economically significant countries, also poses tremendous non-traditional security challenges. Among several others, the issue of maritime terrorism and piracy issues are of grave concern, which I'm asked to address. Terrorism has a political, ideological, or religious background. Same is with the maritime terrorism, which has great impact on the Indo-Pacific region. Terrorists always target the most critical infrastructures of the industrialized world to have a greater impact and visibility. Their major focus is on choke points and mega harbors that can have huge impact on international trade. For instance, the strategically important Strait of Malacca is one of the critical choke points. It connects the Indian Ocean with the South China Sea and Pacific. It is the most significant trade route between the Far East, the Gulf State, and Europe. More than 90,000 ships use the strait every year, and 1/3 of the world trade, 80% of oil exports to East Asia, and 2/3 of LNG exports passes through the Strait of Malacca. Similarly, the largest port of Asia are Kobe, Tokyo, Yokohama, Busan, Shanghai, Kaohsiung, Hong Kong, and Singapore. And these can be on the target focus of terrorists in the Indo-Pacific region. Thus, the world trade is potentially threatened by maritime terrorism and piracy. Any kind of cooperation in this field would be well-founded and could be the basis for anti-terrorism measures and for joint anti-piracy missions. In the last couple of years, the good cooperation between Singapore, Malaysia, and Indonesia has successfully combated piracy in the region. Piracy, once rampant, has been largely exterminated between the territorial states, have themselves stepped up their anti-piracy efforts. These efforts include the Eye in the Sky and Malacca State Patrol, involving coordinated and sometimes joint Indonesian, Malaysia, Singapore, as well as CIER and sea surveillances and considerable information exchanges. They have also invited cooperation from outside powers such as India, the US, and Japan. Due to this, the number of hijackings of vessels have declined. That is also because the naval activities of a number of nations has improved security measures taken by shipping companies. There has not been any case of ships carrying armed contractors being hijacked. Similarly, pirate activities has also decreased drastically among the Indian coasts because last year, the Indian Navy also started to increase their patrols, enhance surveillance, and joint patrols. According to analysts, analysts believe that increased use of private security guards to ship international naval patrols, sharing of intelligence by countries, and several other new measures have put control on terrorism and piracy. In this whole process, the role of non-government organizations is really important. There's a need for coordinated approach, joint collaboration among the countries in order to mitigate terrorism and piracy. First, there should be a new look at maritime laws governing the use of force on high seas and within the territorial coastal areas. Second, I think the rules of engagement of the naval units charged with protecting the trade routes need to be coordinated and agreed on. Moreover, a close look needs to be taken on the kind of naval vessels which might be required to combat piracy more cost effectively. Similarly, the use of private security companies should be regulated and agreed. Shipping companies also need to conform on the basis of security requirements when operating in dangerous areas and should at all times comply with due care for their cargo and crew. They should invest in superior defense technologies and measures should be taken to adopt active measures if required. The role of police and security services are important. They should actively combat these international crime groups involved in piracy at the earliest possible point in time in order to reduce the activeness of piracy. This should also prevent piracy from being used by terrorist organizations to advance their aims. The banking community should take a much closer look at money laundering and report all suspicious transactions to the authorities. Similarly, financing of terrorists and piracy should be monitored to contain them. Countries should come with long-term plan to bring stability to Somalia and establishment of an effective Coast Guard and drawn up funding of support such initiatives. This should be a public-private partnership involving suitability qualified private security companies. Hence, the role of non-government organizations are significant. There are questions that I received on the Council of Security Cooperation in Indo-Pacific used to deliberate on the issues of security threat in the Indo-Pacific region, and what has been the outcome of a dozen of meetings in regard to cooperation on traditional threats. I think, actually, I'm not following it in detail, but it would be, it must deal on a track too, and all depend on how more these dozen of countries of the region are involved in this, how their deliberations at the non-government level has been able to provide impartial suggestions and recommendations of the track 1 dialogues concerning Asia-Pacific, that is now Indo-Pacific. Similarly, looking at the role of CSO, I think the first, there need to be awareness among the people and policy groups. Second, debates and discussion to create environment for policy coordination. I think I'd like to end here, and again, thank the organizer for the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jaiswal, for the second remarks. In the second round and during the question and answer, I would like you to stress more on the choke points as you address and the role of CSOs. The 1 and 2, as you mentioned, we are currently doing that. And going forward, which are the other areas and the role of other landlocked countries in Africa as well, such as Ethiopia, that would be really be welcome. Thank you. And moving on to the next, from landlocked to an island nation representative, we have Kristy. Kristy, also this century is known as the maritime century. And we are seeing that Taiwan is definitely becoming more and more important, especially for the countries which believe in the idea of the Indo-Pacific contracts for at least the past 5 years. Given your experience and Taiwan, could you walk us through what challenges does island nations face, especially in regard to the climate change, and what are the mitigating manners that can be addressed through this medium? Over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. I would first like to thank the organizer for having me here, and just a very brief introduction of my organization, Zhonghua Institution for Economic Research. We are one of the leading policy-oriented think tank in Taiwan. We focus very much on the regional study, including Southeast Asia, South Asia, and recently Indo-Pacific region. And in the past 5-6 years, we focus very much also on climate change as well as supply chain related issues. So, and that part of study has become nowadays very important, not only to Taiwan, and also for countries which are seeking cooperations with Taiwan. So I have a few points to make. The first thing is I'll start it with the COVID-19 pandemic. The pandemic has changed the global geopolitical and economic landscape and redefined the scope of non-traditional security. Apart from the non-traditional security challenges we are already familiar with, such as food shortage, natural disasters, and currently the most important ones also include economic sustainability, supply chain resilience, and ability to cope with climate change and eliminate climate crisis. Taiwan, as well as most Southeast Asian countries and some South Asian countries too, are small, developing open economies, highly dependent on international trade. The supply chain disruption caused by COVID-19 pandemic and other reasons, such as geopolitical conflicts, have made the whole world understand the importance of keeping smooth operations of supply chains of necessary consumer products and critical materials such as vaccines and semiconductors. In Taiwan and most Southeast Asian countries, therefore, have made it a priority to strengthen supply chain resilience post-pandemic to avoid potential risk of disruption in the future. Taiwan has a 23 million population, is a small island economy, especially vulnerable to climate change and natural disasters such as typhoon, flood, drought, and earthquakes. As Taiwan highly depends on imports of energy, including oils and also natural gas and LNG, energy security is one more of the key challenges to most of Taiwan's industrial sectors. Therefore, the government not only needs to provide stable water and electricity to all chip makers, which is very important not only to Taiwan, but to the whole world, but also has to provide affordable green power and assist business to achieve a green transformation, which are now the key challenges for most of Taiwan's industry. And in response to the global net zero trend, in April 2021, the president of Taiwan, Tsai Ing-wen, announced the 2050 net zero transition as Taiwan's goal for climate action. A year later, in March 2022, the government released the book of Taiwan's pathway to net zero emission in 2050. In this blueprint, Taiwan will promote technology R&D and innovation in key areas, assist in the green transition of all industrial sector, and promote green growth as a new economic driver. And in Taiwan's 2050 net zero transition roadmap, green and smart agriculture is another important part. Though Taiwan is a net food importer, agriculture is politically, economically, and socially important to its national security. However, in recent years, Taiwan's agriculture faces challenges brought by structural and environmental challenges, including aging agricultural population, labor shortage, global competition, and climate change, which has caused instability in the production and supply of staple food. Therefore, the Council of Agriculture, recently upgraded to Ministry of Agriculture, implemented the work on agriculture production and biodiversity under the National Climate Change Adaptation Action Plan from 2011 to 2016. And in the next 5 years, from 2017 to 2022, the ministry further implemented the Smart Agriculture Program. The program had two main strategies: smart production and digital service. For example, by introducing sensors, smart device, Internet of Things, and big data analysis, farmers in Taiwan could achieve digital knowledge, smart production, optimized products, convenient operation, and cloud tracing. I think these are two major parts of Taiwan's response to climate change and also trying to recover the economy post the pandemic. I think I'll just stop here and waiting for your question. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much. That was very informative about how Taiwan envisions 2050 and with the smart agriculture. Also with this, currently, you're sitting as the chair of ASEAN in Taiwan. How do you see on the pillar of IPEF recently the meet that included or got concluded on supply chain resilience and the APEC, Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, coming up in November? How do you see ASEAN pivoting between the two over there?
Yes, thank you very much. I think that are very two important questions. I think APEC, this year, the host is the United States, has been trying to work with other APEC members, of course, including China and Southeast Asian countries, to explore growth opportunities post-pandemic, because most of the economies have been suffering from a slow recovery. And also they've been working very hard for two transitions. One is digital transition, another one is green transition, which fit into the topics we are discussing today. while the IPAC, you're talking about the Biden administration's goal for inviting 13 economies to form IPAC group to focusing on supply chain cooperation. I think that is something very important because in that agreement, all these members will share information and also arrange some early warning mechanisms. So in case of shortage of, for example, critical semiconductor, and then we'll share with each other either the stock information as well as try to assist them. However, I think that, Taiwan is part of the APEC member. We joined APEC, APEC as a member economy. And however, we are not invited to IPAC, the IPEF mechanism. And therefore, a government here in Taiwan tried to promote not only bilateral collaboration with the United States, but also bilateral or trilateral collaborations with all other Southeast Asian countries as well as Asia, trying to, through all kinds of collaboration to form a better and more close supply chain partnership together.
All right, thank you for your remarks. And moving forward from Taiwan to how we see the APEC in the US in November 2023. Moving on to the US, we have another distinguished member with us, is Aman Thakker. He is with US-India Strategic Center for Strategic India Studies, International Studies. And Aman, my question, since you have been reading about the India-US construct, and given that a lot of countries have come out with the Indo-Pacific related strategy, starting with the US. Although the construct of Indo-Pacific in itself is very old, it just got renowned in 2007 or much later. It was in 1920, a German geopolitician, Karl Horst Schauber, who had first coined or given the term the Indo-Pacific, and he has written that Indo-Pacific in numerous German books. Moving on with you, Aman, how do you see the Indo-Pacific strategy by the US, especially in terms of digitally vulnerable areas, and such as the smaller islands on the east-west coast of US and around and during or in the India-US partnership? Over to you.
Thanks, Puru, and thank you to CUTS International for having me. This is a very timely topic. As you mentioned, my research focuses on the US-India relationship, and I'll speak about some of the ways in which both countries are working together, as well as in some of those third countries, as you mentioned, on the east and western coast of the United States. I'll start really with the core of what's recently happening within the US-India relationship, and a recognition by US stakeholders about India's increasingly digitizing economy and country, and the role that the government in India sees for digitization in development. You see this in some statistics that come out about rising e-commerce use, about India's rollout of the unified payment interface, and incredibly high use of data at an incredibly cheap cost. The typical Indian uses 200 gigabytes per year of data at only 12 US cents per gigabyte. And so that underscores how much digitization is a core component of the development story in India. And you saw this again at the recently concluded G20 summit, where data for development, digitization for development, technology for development were at the forefront of the discussions, not only of the Indian presidency, but also of bilateral discussions that India had with the United States and with other G20 countries, including France and Germany and the EU, as well as the African Union. And so, what I want to talk about is non-traditional security threats in the digital realm that impact, I think, three layers that the United States and India are working both bilaterally as well as with third countries on. The first is on the infrastructure side. So here I mean your broadband connectivity, your 5G and 6G rollout and research, digital public infrastructure that India is developing at home, not just a unified interface, but also on e-commerce, on credit, on mobility, on health, and on skilling. The second is on the actual connectivity, your devices, your hardware. And then the third is your apps and your software, the tools that you use to enhance digitization on a day-to-day basis. And all three of these face non-traditional security threats, be that cyber threats, be that supply chain threats, be that disruptions to the development story because of nefarious activity. And I want to give you some examples about this, particularly in the context of how the US and India are collaborating with each other. Government data from India shows that Indian government institutions, not the private sector, but just the government institution, faced about 1.39 million cybersecurity incidents in 2022. That just shows you the scope of the amount of non-traditional security threats that the Indian government is facing. Now, you go outside of the government to the private sector, 66% of firms in India say that they feel their cutting-edge devices that are connected to the Internet of Things, are unsecured or undersecured and need to be better prepared for the emerging threats in the world. On India's unified payment interface, right, one of the key soft power deployments that India can have, not just at home, but talking about exporting it to other countries and making it a development story for the global South. There were 95,000 incidents of fraud led by nefarious actors, non-state actors, and non-traditional security actors on the UPI network, with a large majority of them in medium to high ticket rupee value. 98% of those transactions and frauds took place between the 0 rupee to 1 lakh rupee spectrum. And so that underscores the nature of the threat. So what are some of the countries doing about it? Both the United States and India are looking to invest in their self-reliance. We talk a lot about maybe Atmanirbhar Bharat, but with the Inflation Reduction Act and some of the steps that in the post-COVID economy that the Biden administration has taken, there's attempts at self-reliance both in the United States and in India. In India, you've seen PLI schemes, you've seen bilateral coordination on cybersecurity and defenses. You're seeing a greater push to onshore and homeshore semiconductor supply chains. As Kristy mentioned, the importance of semiconductors in Taiwan, the same conversations happening between the United States and India. You're also seeing both countries increasingly talk about trusted sources and trusted jurisdictions. And this, again, goes to something that CUTS has been very early on, the T in CUTS clearly standing for trust, something that both countries are talking about how to understand the need for trusted geographies and sourcing key equipment that could be vulnerable to these kinds of non-traditional security threats from trusted geographies. And then the final thing is, as the subtitle of this talk talks about, joint approaches, the establishment of the US-India Initiative on Critical and Emerging Technologies, a deepening partnership between the two countries where digital economy and combating threats in the digital realm are at the forefront of what the United States and India are working on bilaterally. Within the Quad, you saw, going to Puru, your question on what the countries are doing in other countries, particularly on the West Coast of the United States, a deployment of telecom, open and interoperable telecom equipment in Palau being announced in the Quad Summit, and attempts being made to advance security steps against non-traditional threats in other countries. What are the challenges here, and what are the further steps that we could take? The first is, I think we need to go beyond what is interesting and what is exciting. The US and India partnership, particularly under this initiative on critical and emerging technologies, mentioned several different areas of cooperation, from defense to semiconductors to biotechnology to space to telecommunications equipment. But so far, the collaborations really focus on defense, the jet engine deal being part of it, semiconductors and Micron's investment in India, and maybe a little bit on space, right? India joining the Artemis Accords. But can we get to a shared approach on DPI? Can we talk about the role of artificial intelligence and the user harm and user safety issues that it presents for users in both countries as well as globally? Can we talk about communications technology, particularly 5G equipment, which as it rolls out, provides new opportunities for nefarious actors to undermine telecommunications networks, and the need for both countries, as well as the globe, to come up with a approach on on securing some of this technology. I think moving beyond maybe what is interesting and exciting, like semiconductors and space and defense, to some of these key areas is going to be interesting, and one where civil society, think tanks, academia, researchers can play a role in outlining where the threats are and what the opportunities for collaboration are. The second area is on aligning between some of the onshoring attempts and the friendshoring attempts that are happening. As Puru, you said in the start of your remarks, no country can go it alone when trying to combat some of these non-traditional security threats. But what we're increasingly finding is in a political environment in which post-COVID, we're trying to onshore jobs and economic development onto our own countries, we're finding it hard to reconcile that with a greater need to collaborate. And this is a two-way street, I think, in the US-India relationship. In as much as US companies talk about how hard it is to enter India with some local content requirements or some of the specific India-specific requirements that India puts up, the United States similarly in its Inflation Reduction Act and some of the key steps that it has taken has domestic content requirements and domestic players taking the lead that Indian players have found a difficult time to manage. And so reconciling this is going to be important. And then the third area that I'd like to just highlight, because this is something that came up in recent discussions, right, about how India introduced briefly a laptop import management system for laptops, personal devices, and hardware. Again, going towards trying to make sure that there isn't a supply chain concentration or a fragile supply chain for some of these issues. We saw what I like to call policy by jhatka, a surprise policy decision that affected the ability for the two countries as well as other countries to play a role in creating a joint approach. So these policy decisions by surprise or by jhatka are only going to undermine efforts to do some shared work and shared collaboration in combating some of these security threats. If India has a concern on some of these areas of concentrated supply chains coming out of an untrusted geography, a need to collaborate and bring its partners along is something that can help advance some of the collaborations in this space and create that joint effort that we're here to discuss in this webinar. So I want to pause here and just make sure that if there are any questions or further discussions that Puru you have or some of the attendees have, but here are some thoughts on the US-India dynamics, as well as some of the ways in which other countries can also play a role in advancing security issues, particularly in the digital realm, moving forward.
All right, that was very informative and in-depth, I would say. I would now mix up with some of the questions that we received before this webinar, and I also would ask all the lovely audience out there to please kindly post their questions. I'll mix it up with if we have to prioritize or have an order of, let's say, the most difficult challenge in non-traditional security challenges in the Indo-Pacific region. What would you say is the immediate major challenge? And in a precedence, probably the next utmost challenge that we can look up to, let's say 2050 going forward. Aman, would you like to go first? Kristy,
sure, I can.
Kristy, I would like you to comment on this one next.
Okay,
yes.
I start and then Kristy can move forward. That sounds good. So from my end, again, as we're looking at technology advancements moving forward, one of the most, I think, underappreciated security threats from a non-traditional security threat perspective is the rollout of a new wave of communications technology, such as 5G, and the way in which our world is going to be even more interconnected. And if we do not find, I think, both on the hardware side, right, trusted sources of some of this equipment that would not be vulnerable to non-state actor or nefarious actor attempts to undermine some of the telecommunications equipment, as well as on some of the software side, we're talking about interconnected devices, an even more globalized world if some of this technology is really implemented to the core. Greater collaboration between some of these countries and impacts and spillovers from developments in one part of the world to the new with artificial intelligence and some of the already, threats that we're seeing about very, very convincing misinformation and disinformation. A shared approach at trying to manage cutting edge technology is going to be a very, very significant non-traditional security threat that all countries need to come in together. And here you see a desire for countries to actually engage and work on, set some ground rules and find opportunities where they can share greater information and come up with a unified approach. And I think the United States and India's example of setting up this initiative on critical and emerging technologies is a good one, not just having government-to-government discussions, right, led by the national security advisors and national security councils of both teams, but private sector coming along. I'd like to see more academia, and as you said, more civil society coming along and participating in some of that discussion. And so I think that, from my perspective, is one of those threats that sometimes goes underappreciated. But as we move forward with India already having one of the world's fastest 5G deployments and already putting its eyes on 6G innovations and technologies, making some of the investments in its universities to work on some of that technology, we'll need to be very careful about how we manage and mitigate the risks from non-traditional security threats in this realm. And over to Kristy, please.
Yes. I think, of course, we have non-traditional security concerns as well as security concerns in Asia Pacific, right? Because we have cross Taiwan Strait, we have this issue immediately next to our door. And apart from this, I think in this region, of course, climate change is one very important issue, because if you look at all these economies in this region, Philippines, Myanmar, Vietnam, even India, I mean, we are very much vulnerable to climate crisis, and that will create a lot of problem, which we are now, even with the advancement of technology, and we do not have the ability to handle this. And the second thing that is not very often mentioned is the demographic issue. For most of the, I mean, India is, of course, you are a very young country, but in Thailand, Singapore, Malaysia, Taiwan, Korea, and Japan, we all have declining aging population. In Taiwan, 2 years ago, we started to have the decline. We started to have declining population. So right now, this aging population is one key issue that we do not know how to deal with. And the third will be, I would mention, because I do economic research, I think it's the rise of protectionism as well as nationalism. So you heard about this cheap nationalism, and also you heard about this a large economy using their economy as a weapon to weaponize the economy by economic coercion, as well as many other threats and sanctions. So I think all these are the falling into the ring of non-security challenges, which needs a lot more dialogues, and those dialogues among different parties as well as collaboration. So far, I don't see that is going smoothly, because you do have groupings, different groupings with different interests. And for example, I mean, Taiwan, we are the largest chip maker in the world, but we are, as mentioned, we are not invited to the IPAF, to U.S. Indo-Pacific strategy. We are also not invited to, for example, the CPTPP, etc. So we need to put politics aside, trying to think of the national security and try to have as much collaboration as possible. Yeah, that is my point. Thank you.
I absolutely agree with both of you here that we should be moving out of the regionalism or the groupism, so to say, if we have to face the challenges and come out with solutions. Climate change, yes, there's no denying that the problems that it is causing. Kristy, combining both your remarks, the first and the second one, since you mentioned the smart agriculture during your first remarks, how do we tend to take the learnings of Taiwan, of smart agriculture, to the smaller islands that are at the brink of climate change? So to say, the maximum funded ones. Over to you, because that is one of the idea of such a forum, that we are having this dialogue to take forward the lessons that we learn. So over to you, Kristy.
Okay, thank you. So I think for Taiwan, we are a very open economy. So international trade of foodstuff and all these things is a necessity. However, we also understand that either the COVID pandemic or other reasons may force the international transportation fail to operation, and therefore it is very important to have a sufficient reserve in the country. So after the pandemic, Taiwan, we used to have certain level of reserve. Right now, we try to increase the reserve, both for food reserve as well as energy reserve, because we foresee so much threats now that never appeared 10 years ago. And the second thing is to make the best of the technology. In Taiwan, we have very scarce, very limited land. For example, we also have aging agriculture population. So the most important thing is to take advantage of technology by big data, by AI, as well as by all kinds of technology. So they really help the farming sector to maximize their production, as well as to reduce, for example, waste, agriculture waste. And then the third point is the government here, as well as the agriculture sector, always have a plan for international cooperation. For example, in the past few years, probably you heard about this New Southbound policy. We have 10 Southeast Asian countries, as well as India and other South Asian countries under the New Southbound policy. We try to work, for example, with Indonesia. And then we provide technology, equipment, and also all these resources. And they provide land and also human resources. So we discuss, and then we build this kind of overseas food base. So when something comes up, and that crop can be shared between Indonesia and Taiwan. So I think that is one of the reasons, one of the methods that Taiwan tried to secure food supply, not only from Taiwan itself, but also from other countries which we consider more supportive of Taiwan. So these are the three main points that Taiwan have been using to maximize its agriculture sector in Taiwan. Thank you.
Thank you. Aman, the next question is for you, and I'm going to mix two questions. One is by Ming Yang. So which regional or multilateral forum can contribute more effectively on solving non-traditional security challenges in the Indo-Pacific? I'll mix it up with the other question, which is from Ani Agnihotri. What is the extent the US is going to operate in the Indo-Pacific region in case China's aggression is not contained in the near future? And given that Kristy mentioned that Taiwan is not invited or not part of the IPEF currently, so what do you suggest? And going forward, over to you, Aman. I know there's a lot of demanding from you, but yeah.
No, these are two big and important questions, and I'll try and answer them in sufficient detail, but happy to dive in, Puru, as you and others think we can go a little deeper as well. On the first one, it's no secret, I think, that international organizations and multilateral forums need updating. I think we have several organizations that aren't prepared or updated to the 21st century enough to deal with some of the new challenges that we're talking about. This is something that, for example, India has talked a lot about, that the Security Council today doesn't reflect 21st century geopolitics. And because of some of the entrenched interests of permanent members, there are some issues and discussions that don't come up. And so Asia in particular, if you see, has tended to work in these mini-lateral engagements, as we see. We can talk about IPEF, CPTPP, RCEP, Quad, and some of the other trilaterals, quadrilaterals, and mini-lateral formings that have come up across the Indo-Pacific. Now you see India participating in some, as you said, Puru, not just the maritime countries, but looking at the Gulf states and looking at India, Middle East, Europe as an area of cooperation. And so, so far, it's there where the action is within the Indo-Pacific. But as Kristy has rightly pointed out, and we've discussed in this webinar, it leaves out certain key players or leads to some fragmented discussions where some topics are discussed among some multilaterals, and then some have to be discussed in a bilateral setting with limited interaction with the broader multilateral process. So for example, with the IPEF, India is part of 3 out of the 4 pillars. There's a separate bilateral track with Taiwan on the same topics as the IPEF that has actually reached a stage of maturity well before the IPEF has language and documents ready for a consensus. And we have things moving at different paces and in different conversations that need to be brought jointly. And part of that just requires, I think, updatation of some of our multilateral institutions. And I think that's why you saw in the G20 discussion led by India, for example, a need to update some of the multilateral development banks to create resilience in some of the economies, a need for the global South to maybe have a greater voice in some of the multilateral discussions that are happening. So I think this is going to be an issue that continues to be in flux, but that at least addresses, I think, some of where the discussions are happening today and why sometimes international organizations aren't at the forefront of what we talk about in terms of security challenges, both traditional and non-traditional within the Indo-Pacific. On the US participation in the Indo-Pacific, I think this has increasingly become an area of bipartisan cooperation, and there's very few areas of bipartisan cooperation within the United States, but I think we've seen for the last 5 or so presidents a commitment towards engaging Asia more. And now as we pivot away from Asia Pacific to Indo-Pacific, engaging this region more, this is something that even a largely differentiated foreign policy administration like the Trump administration, with a much more transactional approach to geopolitics, has still found a need to engage and recognize some of the threats that are coming from this region, and a need to work with partners on burden sharing, demanding perhaps more from partners than traditionally the United States, as in being more transactional, but remaining, I think, active in recognizing the threat and wanting to manage it along with partners and allies. And so I think here, the United States, based on some of the continuity that you see in terms of the way administrations have talked about it, the policy documents that have been released by successive administrations, and some of the attention from both the president to the cabinets to the working level officials paid to Indo-Pacific coordination and cooperation, I see that the United States is going to continue to be present for some of these countries. Now, within that presence, there may be differentiated as we see some of the political dynamics in the United States affecting foreign relations. And I think there are questions in each of the capitals about what the upcoming election might mean for U.S. commitment towards the Indo-Pacific, and how that might manifest, the Biden administration taking a very traditional hub and spoke approach, working with partners and allies, hosting, for example, the Japanese and South Korean leaders to make sure that the allies are working together, engaging the region through the IPEF and other mediums, raising the Quad to a leaders level summit. These are all steps that they've taken. The Trump administration, should that come into power, or maybe another Republican administration as the primary plays out, may take a different approach. But I think broadly, the trend of US participation and involvement in the Indo-Pacific in terms of addressing and working to mitigate the risks from threats, both traditional, non-traditional security threats, I think is present, and you will see that continue over the course of the 21st century, or at least what we can see so far over the next decade.
Thanks, Aman. That was very well answered. There's another question from Mr. Kanan Rajtham. How can we convince the large countries to focus more on economics than on geopolitics? I'll answer that. So Indo-Pacific construct, as we are aware, is from smaller island nations to middle powers to larger countries. We cannot be leaving any country outside of the Indo-Pacific region if we have to find solution. That includes China. So we need to find constructive, collective solutions going forward. With this, we have almost come to the end of our very informative session. Before that, I would like to call upon now Kiran, are you with us?
Yes, I am with you, Puru. Thank you.
All right. Before that, any 2 pointers from Kristy or from Aman or Dr. Jaiswal, if you're still here, if your internet is still allowing you. I know it's raining heavily in Nepal.
Nothing from me. Thanks. Back to you, Puru.
All right. I would like to call upon Kiran Meetarbhan. She's Director, CUTS International, to deliver her closing remarks. Over to you.
Thank you, Puru. I would like to thank all the speakers today because I think this is a timely discussion since we're all speaking about navigating non-traditional security challenges in the Indo-Pacific region. I'm a Mauritian citizen, so I'm from Mauritius. So whatever has been discussed here, I think is of great relevance to us as well. So you have been speaking of topics like piracy, terrorism, climate change affecting Taiwan, which is similar to us. So I would like to share a bit our experience on that matter. So as the first speaker, Mr. Jaiswal, mentioned about piracy. So we all know that in the Indian Ocean region, the Somali-based piracy has been for several years a security concern to the whole Indian Ocean region. I mean, it was a threat for commerce, it was a threat for security and peace in the whole region. And the international navies trying to counter piracy of Somalia, they were very reluctant at the beginning to take any suspect to their countries because they first lacked the jurisdiction to put them on trial, or the fear was that those pirates may seek asylum. So they wanted to prevent such situation. In that case, I think Mauritius was the first country which came forward in the East Africa and Indian Ocean region. And it came forward and agreed to conduct trials intending to, try these pirates. And those pirates were in fact imprisoned in Mauritius, in the Mauritian prison as well. So this was something which was really appreciated by probably the international community. We even secured at the time, I think, a grant of around 3 million euros from the European Union for the trial and detention of those piracy suspects at the time when Mauritius decided to try those pirates. After that, I think there has been more discussion as to regional cooperation, and there has been some changes, but that was at the beginning. So as researchers have indicated that the root causes, like the indicators of poverty and institutional fragility, which correlates, of course, with piracy. There are also research which also indicate that piracy is connected to armed insurgency. There are lots of disturbance in the African region, as you all well know. So rebels in these African countries, they seek resources to help fund their action. And now this is linked to what we're going to call terrorism also. But there has been lots of international cooperation, the civil society, the NGOs, which have played an active role on aspect of preventing terrorism, for example. So if I take the example of Mauritius, for example, the NGOs have contributed a lot. So you all probably know that Mauritius is a multiracial society. We have a mix of people of Indian origin. We have the Muslim, we have people of Chinese origin alongside, and the descendants of the slave, which is called under our constitution, the Creole community. And we also have a few descendants of the colonial masters, which is mix of French and British, and which controls the whole economy. So living in peace is of very importance because we are a financial services sector, so political stability is important to us. It's in fact one of the main attraction for international investors. So the United States or even the United Nations has from time to time indicated that there may be a threat of terrorism in Mauritius, and we thank God nothing has happened in spite of the fact that it has been indicated that probably that risks are there. But there has been an important role played by the NGOs. So I'm going to speak about NGOs because we're going to stick to that subject. So an important role played by the NGOs, to perform valuable community functions. So in fact, they have acted as a catalyst in the development of opinions ideas that is vital for building strong and vibrant communities in Mauritius. They have provided forums where experiences were shared on a personal level, civil society institutions, and the NGOs contributed to healing community rifts whenever there is any which may be arising, any tension which were palpable. The NGOs have intervened really to heal those tensions. They have been engaged also in outreach activities. They have taken proactive steps to address the root causes of terrorism, potential terrorism in Mauritius. Well, another issue which Kristy has been talking about is the impact of climate change. So Mauritius, just like Taiwan, is a small island state. So we have limited resources. It's a small country, you cannot expand your land. So, and we are very, very vulnerable to climate change. Especially we have, because Mauritius depends a lot on its agricultural sector and on its tourism sector. In fact, the tourism sector is the main foreign earning sector in Mauritius, which is followed by financial services and agriculture. So the impact on the climate change, impact on those different sectors, agriculture and the tourism sector has been felt very strongly in Mauritius. So we have been witnessing constant flooding. So that has become a serious issue, such that the Prime Minister's office has instituted a disaster management committee. We have been witnessing severe droughts, which has affected the country's agricultural sector, but climate change has also affected the fishing industry. So the impact has been on food security. And of course, COVID-19 has added to this, the Ukraine war has added to this as well. What Mauritius is doing is taking a holistic approach. So it is addressing issues like water scarcity, it is investing in renewable energy to address those food security issues. So it is also committed to reduce greenhouse gas emission from the agricultural sector. And just like Taiwan, we rely largely on the fishing industry, but however, fishing in Mauritius is more for local consumption rather than export. In fact, we have a big economic exclusive zone, but which is exploited by Taiwan, for example, or China, because we don't have the necessary facilities to do that, though now there is negotiation, I think, with the Indian government and other agencies to try and exploit high sea, what we call the high sea fishing. But right now, fishing is basically for local consumption. And there is a huge community, there's lots of livelihood which depends on those local fishing industry. So they have been deeply impacted by climate change as well. Mauritius has partnered with the UN and the EU now to empower those artisanal fishers to move out of exploited lagoons. There are several measures. I mean, we are short of time, but there are several measures which have been instituted, to address those issues. So in its Vision 2030 plan, Mauritius aims to transform the country into a high-income economy by 2030. So the ocean economy has been identified as one of the main sectors which will play a key role in this transformation. And this relates to developing Mauritius as a regional fishing center, a regional petroleum hub, have a cruise terminal, but more importantly, to drive and implement projects related to the blue economy. So we have been investing in protecting our marine life and reef barriers, our aquaculture, which is both off lagoon and in lagoon aquaculture. There are lots of incentives which are being given to investors to come and invest in these sectors. And we are also trying to partner with whoever is interested to exploit the marine renewable energy. So these are the different sectors that Mauritius is looking into to address the new challenges which is ahead of us. I understand there is no shortage, of course, of forward-thinking business, industry group, and scientists, to put their mind to settle to bring whatever is at stakes, whatever the blue economy into existence. So I think the cooperation of all stakeholders and a unified approach, united approach is needed here. Just like in the Indo-Pacific, I think that united approach is also needed at a regional level in the Indian Ocean Africa region, but subsequently probably at a more higher level and international level, so that we can converge on issues which is similar, especially for small island states who are facing all these threats and issues. So with this, I would like to take the forwards of this, the learning of this webinar to address the challenges faced by all of the stakeholders. So over to you, Puru.
Thank you very much, Kiran, for putting out the perspective of Mauritius. Now, as we are running out of time, we are also running out of the solutions that are laid on us and on our table. With this, with the completion of this webinar and the closing of the webinar, I would also like to tell our audience who have been patient enough, some of the questions have been unanswered, but we'll try to answer them by our action going forward. With this, we'll have a report and the outcomes of this webinar and how we can have multifaceted solutions to these issues that have been discussed today to the other members of Indo-Pacific Civil Society Forum. All right, thank you once again, Aman. Thank you, Kristy. Thank you, Kiran. Thank you, Dr. Jaiswal, and the team and the audience for being here, for being with us. And have a good day wherever you are. Good night. If it's night, good morning, and have a good day.